Good afternoon, and thank you for joining UKAS on our webinar today, Demystifying Your Journey to Accreditation. We'll be starting in a minute. As you can see from the notes on the screen, we won't be enabling microphones during this webinar. However, we will be having a Q&A session at the end. And if you'd like to submit a question for that, you can do it at any time throughout the webinar with our Q&A box at the bottom. And please do use the Q&A option rather than the chat option, as that will allow us to keep on top of everything and make sure that even if we can't answer anything during the webinar, we can get back to you offline. The webinar is being recorded, and I will be sending a copy of the recording round to all delegates next week. So if you want to refer to it, then you can. The actual presentation today is on the journey to accreditation, and so we'll be going through a little bit more detail into all the different steps for how you can prepare for accreditation, the application and assessment process, and also maintenance of your accreditation thereafter. We are going to be joined, it's Louise Sanders, who is going to be delivering today's presentation. Louise is our Head of Development and Scheme Integrity. She's been with UKAS for a number of years and is perfectly placed in order to take you through this webinar. At the end, we'll get to all the questions that get submitted in the Q&A, and Louise will be able to address those at the time as well. So with that, I will hand you over to Louise, and thanks again for joining us.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Laura. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our webinar this afternoon. So we're going to talk about your journey through the accreditation process, give you some background on the information that we have available to you, support that we can offer, and what accreditation looks like and the steps that form part of that journey. So my name's Louise Sanders. I'm Head of Development and Scheme Integrity here at UKAS. I've been with the company now for 19 years. Seems an awful long time, doesn't it? So I started off very much as in the testing environment. So I'm an analytical chemist by background, and 17025 is the standard that I've always used when I was still in a laboratory and managing a laboratory. And then on joining UKAS, obviously we spread our wings. So I'm now comfortable with all of the different standards and have used them, developed 17024 at the minute as part of the ISO CASCO group. But certainly that now covers inspection, certification of all sorts, as well as testing in lots of different areas. So we're going to give you some further information for organisations such as yourselves who may be considering embarking on the journey towards accreditation. So please do feel free, as Laura said, if you have any questions throughout the webinar, please jot them down in our Q&A function. Laura will be managing that throughout. She'll answer as many questions as she can throughout the webinar, and then we'll have some time at the end to answer any sort of common themes and discuss those together as well. So please raise your queries, your comments in that Q&A function, and we'll address them at the end of the process. Okay, I'm going to move on now to the general presentation. And here we go. So this webinar that we're in now is part of a series that we repeat regularly throughout the year. The first series of the current run was held last week, and that webinar was aimed at introducing the concept of the value of accreditation. And then next week we have a third session, and that goes into more detail about the role of our assessment managers. So they're the people who manage all of the assessments, manage your cases, manage the relationship between us and your organisations, and form your point of contact with UKAS. So today's webinar, we have a long list of things to cover. So we're going to talk about what accreditation is in terms of, is it being right for your organisation, your sector? Are you ready to proceed with accreditation? how do you begin your application, and then we'll talk about the different assessment stages. So that's a pre-assessment and then the initial assessment as well. We'll talk about our approaches and how we can use different tools to perform our assessments, and then how we deal with any findings. So we call these lots of different things, whether that's a non-conformity, a finding, and an improvement action. But however named, we'll talk about how we deal with those. And then, of course, following the grant of your accreditation, we'll then talk about how you maintain your accreditation, what kind of costs are going to be involved, and what would be next for you if you choose to move forward and go ahead and apply for accreditation. So the first thing on that list, is accreditation right for you? So before you apply, it's important to consider whether accreditation is the correct course of actions for your business, for your sector. Is it what your stakeholders and your customers indeed want? Is it something that regulators or government are requesting? So it's worth recapping here on the benefits that accreditation can provide. Now, these are wide and varied and include that we can highlight gaps or weaknesses in operational capability and provide an opportunity for improved organisational efficiency and outputs. Accreditation provides independent assurance of technical competency that can set you apart from your competition. And that independent assurance is something that we have quoted to us over and over again, that it's somebody outside the organisation, outside the sector, coming in and verifying that the processes performed do indeed meet the rigour of assessment and accreditation. The assessment process that accompanies accreditation can also help to assess and identify risks, and then hopefully also reduce those risks as you move through the process and understand your organisation, perhaps in a different way or from a different angle. The global recognition provided by accreditation increases international acceptance for import and for exports. And because of the mutual recognition arrangements that we have through the likes of the IAF, the International Accreditation Forum, the International Laboratory Accreditation Community Corporation, ILAC, and the EA, which is the European Accreditation Forums, having UKAS accreditation can aid in the removal of technical barriers to international trade and recognition and acceptance of work, products, processes, tests as you go along. Now, accreditation also creates confidence in the industry supply chains and is often specified by public and private sector organisations as a prerequisite for acceptance. Examples of mandatory accreditation for activities include a lot around our forensic services in the UK. So these need and are required to be accredited to ISO 17020, that's the inspection standard, or indeed 17025, the testing laboratory standard as well. That depends on the activity that we're going to be accredited. And all of that is performed alongside the Forensic Science Regulator's statutory code of practice. So it's a kind of two-pronged approach there that we use to accredit our forensic services. Then we also have the control of asbestos regulations that were set in 2012. And these need to be accredited by 17025 and reviewed against an approved code of practice and guidance. So screening services for healthcare are also included. Now, this might be infectious diseases in pregnancy. These also must be accredited as part of governance requirements. And you'll all have been aware during the pandemic that we had numerous services, a lot of them involved in workplace testing or testing for people wanting to travel and move around. That testing all had to be accredited, and the sampling of those people for that testing, subsequent testing, also had to be accredited as well. And that was stated by government during the pandemic. So accreditation provides confidence to employees, customers, and stakeholders of a commitment to quality and service improvements. Accreditation supports the generation of new business potentially providing expanded access to new markets or regions. And UKAS surveys our customers at least once a year to gain a better understanding of how those commercial benefits of accreditation are actually existing and how they're perceived. And the stats on the right-hand side of this slide feature the results from this year's survey, which you can see are very positive. So great news from that side. Moving on, another question people ask a lot is, well, is it applicable to me? Do I need to be accredited? Why, does my sector need it? So UKAS provides accreditations for organisations providing a wide range of services, and you can see some of those here. So we've got testing, we've got biobanking, got calibration, validation, verification, medical testing, as well as the certification standards, the inspection standards there as well. It's important to establish whether accreditation is applicable to your business and the sector that you operate within. UKAS accreditation is granted to organisations that have demonstrated that they meet the requirements of the relevant national or international conformity assessment standard. So that's what we assess organisations against. If you're a testing or a calibration or a medical laboratory, or you provide certification, inspection, or indeed validation and verification services, then accreditation is likely to be very relevant to you and your organisation and your sector. Accreditation is also applicable in a number of healthcare areas, such as physiological and imaging services, medical physics, clinical engineering, biobanking, we've already mentioned, proficiency testing as well. And finally, accreditation is applicable to producers of reference materials in a number of sectors, and those support the testing laboratories particularly. Purchasing the relevant standard is always really important, that you have a copy of whichever standard we will be assessing you against and accrediting you to. So one of the first things you need to do when you've decided to take your first steps on this journey to accreditation is to purchase the standards relevant to your activity. Now you can purchase them either from the British Standards Institute website, BSI, or from ISO itself, which the majority of standards that we use are ISO standards. So they're there for globally recognized, globally used standards. Some of the healthcare standards, such as the ICRIP standard, for example, are freely available, and you can get that from both our website or from the ICRIP's website as well. But generally, they do need to be purchased and then registered, licensed to you for use within your organisation. Now, accreditation is granted against a specific standard, as we've just said. So a conformity assessment body, such as yourselves, can be accredited to a number of standards for various activities. So you might be doing some testing, you might also do some inspection or certification. Standards are formulated by groups of experts. These are British, European, and globally recognised standards. UKAS are very involved in this process, and we sit on a number of the committees at the moment that are revising those international standards in various disciplines, and that's something that we are very sure and confident that is extremely important for us to represent the requirements of the UK and to have that voice to make sure they are heard. Now, standards outline the requirements that must be met by organisations to succeed and then to deliver their services safely and also effectively. Standards define the best practice in many different areas and come in a number of different formats. We've just got a selection of them there for you to consider. So is your business ready? Are you ready to proceed? During these early stages, UKAS will work with you to establish if your business is ready for accreditation. And if not, if there's still some work to do, what options are available to help you to prepare to develop your processes, your systems, your staff. And whilst we can never consult, we can always support you. And we have a number of different tools available to us and different options for you that we can help with in that way. UKAS provides you with various resource materials to determine whether your business is ready to apply for accreditation. So before you begin your journey, there are a few things that we recommend that you do. And these include, firstly, making sure you're really familiar with the standard. So if it's 17025, that you've reviewed it, that you've done a gap analysis, you understand where you meet those requirements, and you've identified if there's any gaps, if there's any interpretation of the standard that's needed, that you understand what it means to you in your business, in your sector, and those requirements are fully understood. So once you understand those requirements, you need to ensure that you meet them. Equally, making sure you're familiar with any supporting publications that are associated with the standards. And one of the things you can do to help you here is to ensure that you subscribe to UKAS's monthly publications newsletter. And this provides lots of information about new publications, updated publications that we hold, and ones that have been withdrawn, and ones that are asking for consultation for comments. So I'd really suggest and encourage you to sign up for that, and you can do that via our website. We do have a number of readiness tools. So one of them is 17025. So this has been developed especially for organisations considering applying for 17025 accreditation. Now, this is a free online tool which is available to you from the UKAS website. And it helps testing and calibration laboratories who are considering accreditation to identify any gaps in the requirements of the standard and their current operational status. We're now issuing further readiness tools for the other standards and other activities, so please keep an eye on that. It's not just now relating to 17025, but we're widening that and issuing more of those quite quickly now as we're addressing the needs of all of the organisations. The UKAS Training Academy is in place and also offers a range of courses that are relevant to all accreditation standards in order to help organisations prepare and get themselves ready for an accreditation assessment. It'll help you to enhance your knowledge of the standards and the quality professionals, full quality professionals in all sectors. And a full list of our available training courses are available from our website. And there's a number of different ways we can offer those training courses. They can be either in person, and we tend to move those around the country. They might be virtual, so we use a tool that allows us a platform to work with you virtually. And then we can also do some on-site test training with you in your organisation, just for your organisation. So that would be delivered on your own premises. And then we also have a large and ever-growing suite of e-learning options, and all of that and information around it is available on our website. And then moving on, publications. We like a good publication at UKAS. To help you in your journey, you should identify the relevant supporting UKAS publications which will be required for you to gain accreditation. So that might be international publications, which we've already touched on, that are issued by the EA or the IF or ILAC, and also available on their websites. Or it might be supporting publications, more in terms perhaps of the technical side of things, which can be found on the UKAS website. So please do have a look. There's a large number of different publications, technical policy statements that you can download and use from there. As we've already mentioned, you can sign up to receive monthly updates, and the monthly publications also include information on various standards that might be out for consultation or that have been withdrawn, as we've said previously. So going back to the readiness assessment tool, we've developed this to help organisations decide whether accreditation is right and is where you need to be at the time, and how ready you are to perform. So you can assess this via the website under the readiness assessment tool, and as we said, there are others there that are available. So the tool itself focuses on the main themes of 17025, and there'll be many smaller points and specifics that aren't covered. We can't cover everything, but we will go through principles and the main topics with you, of course. However, if your answer is yes to most of the questions in assessment, then it's likely that you're likely to be ready to apply for accreditation and move to the next point. So it's there to help you identify how ready you are, and so that you're comfortable when you do apply, that you're in the right position to do so. Now, to support our accreditation work, we offer public and on-site training courses, as well as providing international advisory courses and services. While training is certainly not a mandatory requirement for gaining accreditation, it can be useful in enhancing the knowledge of some of the more complex areas of the standard, or providing the tools and techniques to fill in the remaining gaps and ensure that your systems and processes are developed in line with the requirements of accreditation. And certainly our public courses also give the opportunity to learn from each other, to learn what the questions are in other areas, and actually you get an awful lot of learning from others and the questions that they might ask, the queries that they might have, and actually you can all help each other, which we find is a very positive outcome of the training courses. Now, our portfolio of courses provides UK and overseas delegates with knowledge and best practice of accreditation practices and the conformity assessment systems. And we use expert trainers who are committed to providing you with the knowledge and the skills so that you can add value to your organisation and confidence for your customers. All UKAS Academy trainers are current or previous senior assessment managers. So there is also an opportunity to ask them specific questions relating to the standard, not your organisation, but around the standard and how you might interpret it, and how then you might, what you might need to demonstrate, how you might need to demonstrate conformity to it. As we've said, training can be either in person, and we dot those around the country, could be on site at your own company's premises. We offer a huge amount of our training now on a virtual platform that is a really popular way of learning, and reduces costs in terms of travel and overnight stays. And then we also have that large suite of e-learning modules as well for you to access. So moving on now, we're going to talk a little bit about how you would apply for accreditation, and we're going to explore that process together. This slide describes the application process itself. So as you can see, it's a multi-step process. There's plenty to do, and we will help you through each stage, and very much support you in the process. But you will need to complete the correct application forms. This will include details of what to submit. So we ask you for certain information. This might be key policy documents or key procedures, proof of your legal identity, your legal status, to ensure that we can swiftly process your application and move on to the assessment work. So supporting materials that we're going to need are the correct relevant application forms. So this will be whether it's testing or inspection or certification, for example. All of the information on this is available on our website. We're going to ask for certain management systems documentation. That might be a quality manual, or your policies, for example, the legal identity and status of your organisation, we will ask you to sign a copy of the UKAS agreement, and you will be required to pay the application fee as well. Now, if your organisation is based outside of the UK, we can still accept those applications, but we will need to review it in a slightly different way. So please contact our sales group who will help you with that process. So that's sales@ukas.com, and they will help you with that. Moving on to the review of your application. So we'll review the ability to carry out the assessment of the applicant. So we need to make sure that you have policies and procedures, that you're competent to do so, and that we're competent to do so as well. So is this something that we've assessed before, or is it something that we need to develop on our side in terms of our competency, our processes, and have we got any personnel ready who can help to assess you? So are they available? Have we got enough of them? Have they got the correct skills? And we always need to ask ourselves that questions. The review will also include the ability of ourselves to carry out an initial assessment in a timely manner. Now, if we haven't assessed this before and we have to develop our own accreditation, then that will mean a prolonged process. And how long that might be will depend on the complexities of the new accreditation that we're developing. If it's very similar to something we already offer, then that timeframe might be hugely reduced. And of course, if it's something we accredit normally as part of daily sort of business as normal, then there shouldn't be any delay to our ability to respond to you. And of course, if there is going to be a delay, then we'll discuss that with you to ensure that you're fully aware of what we're doing and why we're doing it, and when we're likely to be able to be ready to move forward. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about the pre-assessment. So we're moving now into the actual assessment process itself. The mechanism for determining your readiness to move to the initial assessment and what that looks like, and what the initial assessment itself will look like as well. So pre-assessment isn't mandatory. It's highly recommended, and we do find that organisations that have pre-assessment do usually move through the rest of the process more smoothly than those that don't. But it is optional, and there's something that your assessment manager will discuss with you when we receive your application. Value is it allows you to meet your assessment team, the assessment manager or a lead assessor. It allows us to get to know you and you to get to know us. We'll talk about the processes, and we can answer questions at this point. So you can ask about the process, about how you're complying with the standard, if you've got any questions on interpretation of the standard and how that relates to you. These are the kind of things that a pre-assessment allows us to do in a more informal setting. But it also provides that impartial external perspective on your processes, on your procedures, on your business, on the activities that can be that are being performed. And obviously, if there's any significant weaknesses or anything that we note where you're not currently going to be compliant with the standard, we will always point these out to you so that you're aware of those weaknesses and you can address them. So we find lots of things on pre-assessments. However, they tend to distill into these kind of areas. We mentioned interpretation of the requirements within standards. That can lead to misunderstandings if you have misunderstood the requirement, and we can help you with that in perhaps making sure that we all understand what those requirements are, how to interpret them, and how to implement them. Sometimes normative requirements of the standards, so things that you absolutely need to do, have been missed, they haven't been picked up, or they might have been incorrectly determined by the organisation. So you might have got a different normative requirement to one that is actually needed. in a number of different areas, as we've already touched upon. There are IAF particularly, or ILAC or EA mandatory documents that are also required to be adhered to, and sometimes those haven't been got to yet, so they haven't been implemented, and that work needs to be completed. Quite often we find that policies and processes have been written, but they're not necessarily implemented yet. So we have beautiful, lovely manuals and procedures, but they're all crispy new and not being used. So staff aren't necessarily aware of them, and that spread out into the rest of the company hasn't necessarily been completed yet. Quite often we see on a pre-assessment that what's happening in a laboratory or in an audit isn't quite what's written in a policy or a process. Now, quite often that can be a positive thing, and what's happening is far better or more detailed than perhaps the procedure would allude to. But we just need to make sure that it all ties up so that it does tally. So those are some of the common things that we see on every assessment, really. Talking a little bit about the standards that we do use and how similar they are. They generally share now the same structure. They're not all in this format yet, but they're certainly all moving towards this, and all of the 17,000 series standards are now included within this format. So they have general requirements, so that might be your legal entity, that you'll need to be a legally responsible organisation, for example. There will always be structural requirements, so what you need to be. There will always be resource requirements, what you need to have, and there'll be process requirements in what you need to do. And then all of this is covered by general requirements around the management system. The management system requirements do vary very, very slightly from standard to standard, but the processes underneath them are all very recognisable. And moving on, you would see them, you need to have document controls, records control, non-conformities, corrective actions, management of complaints, appeals, that kind of thing, improvement processes in place to address your risks and opportunities. There'll always be a requirement in there for an internal audit and an internal audit process. This is your evaluation of your processes, and that also then concludes with a management review, which is how you sit together and say, do we meet the requirements of the standard, but actually how's our business doing? Is there anything changing? Is the amount or the type of work changing? Are we growing into a new sector? All of those kind of things that you would also need to consider as part of your management of your organisation. And then moving on to the initial assessment. So this happens once the pre-assessment has happened, or if you choose not to have pre-assessment, we can move straight to this. But as we said, there are potential consequences with that. What does an initial assessment include? So there is always going to be an opening meeting and a closing meeting as well, actually. So the opening meeting will be to introduce everybody, to go over the planning and the timings for the day, when we can see certain things or to interview certain people, and that will be to set the scene then on why we're there and what the process is going to look like. The assessment itself will include a review of records and systems, policies and procedures, and we'll also be looking at witnessing of activity. So if that's a laboratory, that will mean witnessing experimental work and processes. If this is an inspection, we'll be coming out with you to witness your inspection activity, and the same with certification as well, for example. We will aim to do a full vertical and horizontal assessment so that we get a really good picture, not only of the different processes that are in place, but how they fit together as well, so that we can see full compliance with the standard, how it all works together, and the structure that you've implemented, the framework that you can get from using a standard that has been developed for accreditation purposes. Now, following the assessment, we'll always issue you with a full report. This will detail where we've been, what we've done, what we've witnessed, what we've discussed, which policies and procedures we've read, for example, and it will identify the strengths and any weaknesses of the organisation. So we'll be looking to determine and demonstrate compliance. So we'll be always evidencing that. So if you've met a requirement, we'll say how, and we'll say what we saw about it. If there's a weakness, then we will raise what we call an improvement action, which is a finding or a non-conformance, and we will work with you as well to work out how you're going to address them. And we will ask you this as part of the process. So this is the issue. We've raised that you haven't got a policy for document control. How are you going to address that? And we will discuss that and agree that with you as part of that assessment. There are various ways in which an assessment can be delivered, more so now than ever. And the assessment approach will be considered ahead of the assessment taking place. We'll probably discuss that with you in terms of what we need to see, how we can see that, when we can see it. And in terms of the assessment approach, we varied this greatly. Obviously, with the recent pandemic, we were forced overnight to move from on-site assessments, which was very, very much our situation normal, to not being able to do very many of those at all. We still did some key ones, particularly for the pandemic and the testing that needed to go on there. But generally, it was all stopped overnight. So we had to reevaluate the way that we manage our assessments, and we now use face-to-face assessments still, but we do use a number of different remote techniques. So we might do some of your assessment remotely via Teams or via Zoom, and then maybe there's some things that we do need to be with you to witness or to go out with you to see your customers with. But a blended approach is often the way to go, where we'll vary it and do different things in different ways. And we'll look at that case by case basis with you, and look at it from a risk-based approach on what we need to see and what we feel is the best way to assess your organisation. Assessment findings now. So I've already introduced these in terms of we can either call them a finding, an improvement action, a non-conformity. I'm sure there's lots of other descriptions out there. We have called them a finding in this process. So it's our friendly, happy, cuddly approach to non-conformities. I think we all think non-conformity sounds a little bit punitive, and we'd rather think of it as an opportunity for improvement. So during an assessment, we will always identify both positive and any negative findings, any strengths, any weaknesses. If it's a negative finding, then as we've said, that is classically a non-conformity, which we may call a finding or an improvement action. So a non-conformity is a failure to meet one or more of the requirements outlined in the requirements of the standards. So they are then mandatory improvement actions. So something you need to do to demonstrate and to ensure that you comply with the requirements of that standard. So we've got some points here on the process. Our teams will record any improvement actions generally as we go along, and agree them, discuss them with you. It's certainly not that there's any surprises at the end of the assessment. If we find something, we'll discuss it as we go along. We'll then upload them into the UKAS assessment portal. Sometimes it's not possible to do that because we're either in a highly secure area, or perhaps just the Wi-Fi is not particularly good, or we're underground, or all sorts of different things you can imagine. So it may well be that we will upload it after the assessment, but we will record everything in exactly the same way. Then it's over to you, really. So it's up to you to then review and perhaps investigate that improvement action, work out why it happened. So do some root cause analysis to determine what happened, why it happened, and very importantly, what is the extent? So is it a one-off, or actually is it going to be across the business and you might need to do some further work? And we'll need to have actions of all of that before we can review and clear those findings. For an initial assessment, you'll generally have 12 weeks to complete that process, so 3 months. We'll then review the evidence and the information that you submit and decide whether it has been completed in a satisfactory manner or not. Maybe that we need some further information, in which case we'd come back to you and ask for that. And we aim to do that within 4 weeks of receipt of those actions. The assessment is conducted, and then following that, there's a requirement for an independent decision maker, so somebody who has not been involved in the assessment at all. It may be a person, it might be a committee, it's generally a person for UKAS. We will then review the reports and confirm whether the recommendation is sound, is appropriate. We'll also look to make sure that all of our processes have been considered and assessed as we would require. So we'll be looking for evidence in our reports that everything has been covered as stated on the assessment plan, that we've assessed everything fully and adequately, and that we have evidence of compliance, and that we're comfortable to move forward to the next step. So the recommendation is made by the assessment manager, and they would recommend a grant of accreditation if sufficient compliance is seen, if competence and impartiality are in place, and if the improvement actions that have been recorded are not so significant that it would prevent us moving forward. The decision process itself is split into 2 stages. It starts off with a provisional decision, and it's then followed by a final decision, but I'll come on to that and talk about the differences here. So, as we've said, it's a two-stage process by a person who's independent of any of the assessment activity. The first stage, the provisional decision, tends to be completed once the assessments have been finished. So this is the assessment we've completed. This is the report we've completed. There was this number and this type of nonconformity, and the organisation are now addressing those. So that's the first independent look on the process that has been performed. When all of those nonconformities have been addressed and accepted, and a positive provisional decision has been made, then we can move on to the second part, which is the good part, the final decision. And this includes the actual grant of accreditation. It includes us uploading a schedule of accreditation onto the website, sending you a certificate to say that you are granted. And that's the good day that we all look forward to very much. And once you've been granted your accreditation, you can then use the appropriate symbols or symbol for accreditation in accordance with some defined rules. We always say, just to point out, the symbols are not ours, they belong to government, they contain the crown, and there are very strict rules for how they can be used appropriately and how they shouldn't be used as well. So, for example, you can use them on your certificates and your reports, any quotations and estimates for accredited work, corporate stationery, so you might have some letterheads that you add your symbol to, internal walls and doors, exhibition stands and your websites, as long as it doesn't mislead the reader to say that it would infer that you're accredited for more than you actually are. So we always look at that, and it's part of our general assessments. You're not permitted to use the symbol on a vehicle or on a building or a flag, on any goods or products, or on primary packaging. So there's far more information on that you can find from our website. There's a document on the accepted use of symbols. Okay, and if you trade overseas as well, you can also use the ILAC or the IIF mark that you can see at the bottom of this screen to signal global acceptance. So promotional brochures. now you've got your accreditation, you know, we're quite happy to help you shout about it. So UKAS has produced a variety of materials to promote the benefit of using accredited services, such as those that you provide. They can be downloaded, distributed, or hyperlinked to support any quotations or direct marketing that can be, and all of this can be accessed from our website. We have a set of promotional videos that are used to promote accreditation, and they are hosted on our UKAS YouTube channel. So you can link to those, or you can embed them within your website, and you can subscribe to that channel and receive alerts of any new videos that we add in. Every year on June the 9th, we celebrate World Accreditation Day. The event is organised by ILAC and the IAF and is promoted by standards, metrology, conformity assessment community. So you're encouraged to use the materials produced for this to increase awareness, promote your accreditation status to your customers, to your stakeholders, and the themes and materials each year are published on our website and our social media channels near that June the 9th date. So please do look out for that. Now, following accreditation and that grant and that really good day, then it's into the cycle of maintaining accreditation. So what does that look like? So I'm just going to take you through some slides now just to explain that process. So we can already have moved our way across this slide. So we've gone through the application, we've reviewed your application, we've done a pre-assessment if you asked for one, we've done the initial assessment, and we've granted your accreditation. So now we're at the far right-hand corner, and you can see the 4-year cycle that you now enter into, and this goes, you know, it's perpetual. It would move on and on as you move through the years. So we keep each accreditation cycle to 4 years. Each year you have a surveillance activity assessment, which may vary in what we look at and how we do that. That's something your assessment manager would discuss with you. And then in the 4th year, we would perform what we call a reassessment. So that's where we take a step back actually and say, right, let's check all the policies, procedures are in place, everybody's competent, and we just have a step back and make sure that the structure and the framework for accreditation is still there and is still fit for purpose. Your accreditation will be confirmed on an annual basis through surveillance activities. And as we've said, with a full reassessment every 4th year. The first surveillance assessment takes place 6 months after your initial grant of accreditation. We do it after 6 months because we know that people work extremely hard to reach their grant of accreditation. And then quite often there's a period where actually using all those systems and those mechanisms and those tools in real life, you realise perhaps they don't fit as well as you want to and they need tweaking. So that 6-month period after grant of accreditation is very important. So we come to see you after those first 6 months to see how things are getting on, how everything is being embedded. Has there been any tweaks or changes? What's happened within those 6 months? And then following that, we come in to see you on a 12-monthly basis. So the 4-year cycle of accreditation consists of 3 annual surveillance periods of assessments, and that's conducted in year 1, year 2, and year 3. And then it will also include 1 reassessment activity, and that will happen in year 4. Once that's complete, you then move to your 2nd cycle and another year 1, and so it goes on, year 1, year 2, year 3 reassessment, and it moves forward in that way. At the initial assessment stage, you'll be provided with an estimate of the work involved in the 4-year cycle, and at the time of and the time life of your accreditation will be discussed then and confirmed as it's ongoing. We will also always tell you if we're going to do an assessment, how much time we think we will need, so you'll understand potential costs as well. Talking of costs, accreditation accreditation cost is related very much to your scope. Typically, the larger or more complicated that scope, the more assessment time is required, and that would include then and lead to an increased cost. We have a lot of information on this on our website, so if you look into there at accreditation costs, there's a number of different examples of different kinds of activities and the kind of typical costs that might be would be expected to go across them. And we've got one of those scenarios here. So we can see here that we've got a small laboratory performing soil analysis. We have what the application fee is, what the pre-assessment might look like, the initial, and then the ongoing surveillances and that reassessment. And we will have more information on what this is likely to look like when we've reviewed your application and we know what kind of scope you're looking for. So if you're interested in proceeding with accreditation, the first thing you need to do is get in touch. We have a number of different processes or people that you can get in touch with. So if it's a general accreditation or technical inquiry, we have our info@ukas.com email, and we've got phone numbers there. If you're considering applying, then we've got our sales department who will take you through the process. And if you'd like to attend a training course, then email our training@ukas.com, look on the website, or then there's a telephone number there as well if you'd like to discuss, and we can do that with you. Okay, any questions at this point?
Hi Louise, thanks so much for that. That was a really great overview. We do have some questions that have been submitted during the webinar. You've still got some time if you'd like to submit some questions, so do drop them in the Q&A. First person has asked, do you have examples of dry lab or data-only organisations gaining 15189 accreditation? And they've provided an example to provide medical grade data analysis and clinical reporting services.
That's a really, really good question, and something that we are finding in lots of different areas. For example, biobanks, heavily involved in the healthcare sector. A lot of them don't keep samples, and they're starting to be data banks rather than biological material. So this is coming. In terms of have we accredited any 15189, so that's the standard use for medical laboratories. I'm not aware of any that we have accredited without any activity that we are seeing yet. Now, that's not to say that we couldn't, and I think we're moving towards that and exploring it. What I would suggest is get in touch with us and let us discuss that together, because it will depend on what it is you're wanting to do, what data you're looking at, and what you're going to do with that data. So is it deemed as a test or a process that you with an output, or is it collection and management of it? As you've said, there's reporting. So I think we'd need to know a little bit more about that, but absolutely get in touch. That would be something very interesting for us to discuss with you. That'd be great, please.
Okay, and just for that person, info@ukas.com is a good place to start, because that team will be able to put you in touch with an appropriate member of the technical team who can actually have a conversation with you about that. We've also got some questions regarding timeframes. Somebody has asked, if we have a pre-assessment visit, how will this impact the waiting time for the initial assessment visit? Will this be longer than 6 months before the initial visit if we have the pre-assessments? I guess what they're asking is if they have a pre-assessment, is that going to then pad out the whole process of gaining accreditation?
Yeah, and I understand exactly where this is coming from, actually. I can understand that perception. The pre-assessment is to determine if you are ready. So we are very keen not to be in the position, and we're certainly not in it's not our role or our want then to go out and do assessments that aren't successful. So the pre-assessment is there to determine if you're ready for the initial. So it may well be at the end of the pre-assessment we say, absolutely, you're ready to go, we can come back in a month or 2 months. It may also be the case that at the end of the pre-assessment we say there's a lot of issues here. and how much time do you need? And you might well say, actually, we're going to be at least 6 months or 9 months to get this fixed. So there is that element as well. Of course it will. If you apply tomorrow and you say, I don't want a pre-assessment, I want to go straight for initial, then there will be a time frame which will be shorter than having a pre-assessment. What I can't guarantee, and we can't guarantee at all, is that that initial would be successful, and you wouldn't actually need to have another one after it if it didn't go well. So that is the benefit of having a pre-assessment, is it gives you that information on, are you ready to have an expensive, lengthy initial assessment. Pre-assessments tend just to be 1 or 2 members of our staff. Whereas an initial will be as many as we need to do to cover all of your scope. So the cost differentials can be significant there as well. But it's a good question, and I can see where you're coming from.
Someone else has asked, what is the expected time frame from pre-assessment to on-site assessment if new processes and standards are not required?
Then we can literally, at the end of the pre-assessment, we would be sitting with you looking at diaries. If everything is ready and you're ready to go, that's when we say, right, let's see when we've got gaps. We will try to be with you as soon as possible. That may be a couple of months, and that's what we would be aiming to get at. However, we do say we book 3 months at least in advance. So that then relies on availability of your assessment team. But we're always going to be, keen to get back to you with an initial assessment. We understand how important they are, particularly if you've got timeframes as well. And that's where it's really important for you to say, we have a contract, we need to be accredited by so-and-so, or there's a new regulation coming in, which means it's mandatory, we have to be accredited. Then please make us aware of any timeframes that you're needing to work with so that we can make sure and rearrange our staff if that's needed.
Sure. This is slightly different. Someone's asked what happens if you aren't actually able to clear your findings from the initial assessment in 3 months. What happens next?
Okay, so we would always discuss that with you when we're writing the findings and agreeing the improvement action. So if, for example, it's something that's going to take you a year to look at, then perhaps we'll have a different process. We might ask to have a plan, we might look at it. So it would depend. I think there's lots of different variables here. Is it that physically something can't be done within that time, in which case we would discuss that with you at the assessment, so that when those findings are agreed and accepted, they're achievable. If it's different in the fact that when you actually look at them, you realise that you haven't got a process, or you haven't got a competent member of staff, or there is a significant gap, then I suggest you should flag that up with your assessment manager as soon as possible, so that we can all get together and discuss that. Is it that you need to alter your scope of accreditation? Is it that you're not going to be able to be accredited for something, or is it something you might want to put on the back burner and come back to in a year's time, for example? If after the first initial review of your evidence, there's still outstanding requirements, we send them back to you, and then we get into that cycle. We'll ask you to look at them, we'll review them, and then if they're not clear, then we can send them back. We can also come and do another assessment if we feel that we need to see some more on site. So that's something else. It's quite rare, but we can do it, and we do it. More generally, it might be that you need an extra couple of rounds of evidence to get everything together. My point on that would always be, talk to your assessment manager. If you're struggling with something, let them know. We all know that we agree something when we completely understand and we're in the moment, but 2 weeks later, we haven't got a clue. I read some of my findings sometimes and think, I wonder what I was writing about then. Time plays games with us. So if you can't remember, if it doesn't make sense, or in fact, if you want to change it, you've now thought, I really want to do something different, then please do let us know, and we'll discuss that with you.
Okay. Somebody slightly different has asked, what is vertical and horizontal assessment? Are you able to give a quick
Yeah, of
explanation of
course.
that?
If you imagine the layers of a cake, I always go back to cakes, funnily
Mhm.
enough. So if we have a Victoria sponge with two different layers, for example, if I cut you a slice of that cake, then and we look down it, you can see different layers of that cake. If I'm going to perform a vertical audit, then one of those layers of that cake will be your document control, say, and one might be your internal audits. If I do a horizontal audit, then I will just look at all of your vertical audits across the company. But if I do it from a vertical, then I'll look at your vertical audits in relation to document review. So it's about seeing how systems sit together rather than just looking at things in isolation,
Mhm.
which you would do from a horizontal audit. So it gives you more information. And in fact, if you're just setting up an internal audit process, then doing lots of vertical audits gives you a huge amount of information on your systems and how they relate together and how your processes work. So it's always a good hint to start there if you're needing to get a snapshot of what's going on.
Thank you. And we've also had a question about specifically about cell site 17025, the relatively new accreditation. Obviously,
It
as
is.
head of development, you're pretty well briefed on this. And they're asking, are you experiencing extended wait times for assessments with regards to that particular type of assessment
Yeah,
or
no,
accreditation?
that's one of the projects I look after actually. So where we are with cell site is that we're needing some more ground truth data to come. So the assessments as it stands are kind of on hold because we need this ground truth data to come in to back up the process before we're able to continue. So we have a number of applications that we have that are sitting with us and we're not able to act on them because we're waiting for that information to come in. So as soon as that's done and we've received that information, then we'll be able to pick that process back up and start on with those assessments. But yeah, so yes, there is an extended time at the minute, but it's outside of our control, I'm afraid.
Okay. Right, that actually does bring us to the end of all the questions this afternoon. Thank you so much, Louise. That was really comprehensive, and I'm sure everyone got a lot out of that.
Pleasure.
Um, I will send around an email next week with a copy of the recording. I'll also include links to those readiness assessment tools that are currently available, as they could be useful for some people. In the meantime, if you have any questions for me, you can, or anyone in the comms team, you can email communications@ukas.com. And for more general questions, I do recommend info@ukas.com, as that team are really good at finding the right person in a large organisation full of different specialists to help you with whatever query you have. So on that note, I will close the webinar. Thanks again, Louise, and thank you everyone for
Pleasure.
joining us.
Thank you very much.